Finally, this show is being canceled. Those were the words that echoed through Studio 58 last night as Harrison Ford delivered what might be the most explosive moment in late show history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolded. What started as a seemingly standard celebrity appearance quickly devolved into television chaos that had crew members scrambling and producers frantically signaling from the wings. The tension was palpable from the moment Ford walked onto the set. Stephen Colbert, notorious for his increasingly confrontational interview style, seemed determined to push every button he could find. The veteran actor, promoting his latest project, appeared visibly uncomfortable as Colbert launched into what could only be described as an ambush rather than an interview. "So, Harrison, you're here promoting another sequel nobody asked for," Colbert opened with his trademark smirk, completely bypassing any pleasantries. "Tell me, at what point do you think audiences get tired of watching you phone it in?" The studio audience shifted uneasily as Ford's expression darkened. This wasn't the playful banter viewers had come to expect. This was something far more sinister. Maintaining his composure despite the obvious provocation, Ford replied with measured restraint. "Well, Stephen, I think audiences appreciate authenticity, something that seems to be in short supply these days." The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Colbert, whose jaw visibly tightened. Leaning back in his chair, that familiar predatory gleam flashed in his eyes. "Authenticity," he repeated. "That's rich coming from someone who's been coasting on the same three characters for 40 years. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, and Grumpy Old Man. Which one are you playing tonight?" The audience's nervous laughter couldn't mask the growing hostility radiating from the desk. Ford's legendary cool began to show cracks as he leaned forward slightly. "You know, Stephen, I've been doing interviews longer than you've been in show business. I've sat across from professionals who understand the difference between humor and harassment." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed the first real shot fired in what was about to become an all-out war. Colbert's response was swift and merciless. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hurt the feelings of the man who wanted his own character killed off because he was tired of pretending to care about the fans?" The reference to Ford's well-documented frustration with the Star Wars franchise was a low blow, and the actor's face flushed with anger. "Maybe if you put half as much effort into your performances as you do into your complaints," Colbert continued, "we wouldn't be sitting here watching you desperately try to stay relevant." The studio fell silent, except for the uncomfortable shifting of audience members who realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Ford's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he processed what had just been said on national television. This wasn't playful roasting. This was character assassination disguised as entertainment. Stay relevant? Ford's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several crew members exchange worried glances. "I was making movies when you were still figuring out how to read cue cards without moving your lips. The difference between us, Stephen, is that I've earned my place in this industry through decades of work, not by hiding behind a desk making cheap shots at people who actually create something meaningful." Colbert laughed harshly. "Meaningful? You mean like Crystal Skull? Or how about that disaster Cowboys and Aliens? Face it, Harrison, you're yesterday's news, desperately clinging to past glory. At least when I bomb, I don't take an entire franchise down with me." The personal nature of the attacks was impossible to ignore. Ford had endured decades of interviews, faced down difficult journalists and hostile critics, but this felt different, calculated and cruel in a way that transcended professional disagreement and entered the realm of pure malice. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" Ford's voice grew quieter, more controlled, which somehow made it more menacing. "You've confused cruelty with cleverness. You think tearing people down makes you important, but all it does is reveal how small you really are. The words struck home, and for a brief moment, Colbert's mask slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. But rather than backing down, he doubled down on his aggression. Small? I'm not the one who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else every time someone puts a camera on him. Tell me, Harrison, when exactly did you give up caring about your craft? Was it after the third Indiana Jones movie, or did it take until Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for you to completely phone it in? The systematic demolition of Ford's career and reputation was painful to watch. Audience members began looking around nervously, some pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. Ford's legendary composure was being tested in ways no publicist could have prepared him for. He sat back in his chair, a look of disgust spreading across his weathered features. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said. "This isn't entertainment, Stephen. This isn't even journalism. This is just you getting your kicks by being cruel to people who can't fight back without looking like the bad guy." His voice carried the weight of someone who had finally seen enough. "Can't fight back?" Colbert leaned forward aggressively. "You're Harrison Ford. You've got more money and influence than I'll ever have. If you can't handle a few questions, maybe you should stick to movies where they can edit out your personality." The cruelty was becoming more blatant with each exchange, and it was clear that something irreversible was building between them. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely tense. Security personnel moved closer to the stage as producers debated whether to cut to commercial. Ford's jaw was set in a way anyone familiar with his movies would recognize. He was reaching his breaking point. "A few questions?" Ford's laugh was bitter and cold. "Is that what you call this? Character assassination masquerading as comedy? I came here to talk about my work, not to be your personal punching bag for whatever issues you're working through." The professional facade was crumbling, revealing genuine anger underneath. What happened next would change everything, and the tremor in Colbert's voice suggested he knew he had pushed too far. But instead of backing down, he made the fatal mistake of doubling down once again. "You know what, Harrison? Maybe the real problem isn't the questions I'm asking. Maybe the real problem is that you can't handle the truth about your career." The host's voice took on a sneering tone that made everyone in the studio tense. "You're sitting here acting like some wounded legend. But the reality is, you've been coasting for decades on the goodwill of fans who still remember when you actually gave a damn." Ford's eyes flashed with something dangerous. The careful composure he'd maintained throughout his career was beginning to crack under the relentless assault. "The truth about my career?" His voice rose slightly, just enough to make the audience hold its breath. "You want to talk about truth? The truth is, I've spent 40 years creating characters that mean something to people. Characters that inspire them, that make them believe in something bigger than themselves. What have you created, Stephen? What's your legacy going to be besides making people uncomfortable for cheap laughs?" The personal nature of Ford's counterattack struck a nerve. Colbert's face reddened as he realized his guest was no longer playing defense. "My legacy?" he snapped. "I've built a career on holding people accountable, on asking the questions that need to be asked. Just because you don't like hearing them doesn't mean they shouldn't be asked." "Accountable?" Ford laughed sharply, the sound humorless and cutting. "Is that what you call this ambush? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you invited me here just to take shots at me on national television. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's bullying with better lighting." The word bullying hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Colbert's smirk vanished, replaced by something darker. "Bullying? You think this is bullying?" he spat. "Try being a comedian who has to watch overpaid actors complain about how hard their lives are while they collect million-dollar paychecks for reading lines someone else wrote." Ford leaned forward, his famous intensity now fully focused on his tormentor. "You know what I think, Stephen? I think you're jealous. I think you sit behind that desk, night after night, watching real artists create something lasting while you're stuck making jokes about whatever's trending on Twitter. Must be exhausting, constantly chasing relevance like that. The personal jab hit its mark. Colbert's composure cracked as he shot back with venom. Jealous? Of what? Your wooden performances? Your complete inability to show any emotion beyond mild annoyance? At least when I fail honestly. I don't hide behind characters created by other people and pretend I'm some kind of artist. The studio audience was dead silent now, realizing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Crew members stood frozen at their posts, torn between professional duty and the instinct to intervene in what had become a raw, personal confrontation between two men who clearly despised each other. Ford's voice dropped to a whisper, low, calm, and far more menacing than shouting could ever be. You want to see emotion, Stephen? You want to see something real? He paused, letting the tension build before delivering his words with surgical precision. I feel sorry for you. I genuinely feel sorry for someone so consumed with tearing others down that they've forgotten what it means to build something up. The pity in Ford's voice was more devastating than any insult could have been. Colbert visibly recoiled as if struck. "Don't you dare sit there and patronize me!" he barked. "You don't know anything about me or what I've built." "I know enough," Ford replied coldly. "I know that in 30 years, people will still be watching my movies, still finding meaning in the characters I brought to life. What will they remember about this show? Your cruelty? Your desperate need to make everyone else feel as miserable as you obviously are?" Colbert's mask finally shattered, revealing the bitter, angry man beneath the late-night persona. "You sanctimonious piece of—" He stopped himself just before finishing the profanity. But the damage was done. The last shred of professional civility was gone. Ford stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the studio floor with a sound that echoed through the silent room. "That's enough," he said. "I've sat here and let you take your shots. But I'm done being your punching bag." His voice carried a finality that made everyone in the studio realize the interview was about to end in spectacular fashion. "Sit down, Harrison." "We're not done here," Colbert demanded, his authority faltering under the desperation creeping into his tone. "Oh, we're done," Ford replied, with deadly calm. "We've been done since the moment you decided to ambush me instead of having an actual conversation." He began removing his microphone, each movement slow and deliberate. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? You had the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation with someone who's been in this business for decades. Instead, you chose to be petty and cruel." "You can't just walk out in the middle of a live show," Colbert shouted. "That's unprofessional." Ford paused, fixing him with a stare that had intimidated countless directors and co-stars over the years. "Unprofessional?" His voice rose just enough for every word to carry to the back of the studio, and to the millions watching at home. "Unprofessional is inviting someone onto your show under false pretenses. Unprofessional is using your platform to launch personal attacks instead of having a real discussion." The tension had reached a breaking point. Audience members were openly recording with their phones, sensing they were witnessing television history. Producers in the control room frantically debated cutting to commercial, but the raw electric drama unfolding was impossible to interrupt. Colbert made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "Fine, walk away. Run back to your trailer like the prima donna everyone knows you are. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle real criticism." Ford finished unclipping his microphone and set it down carefully on the desk. When he looked up, his expression carried decades of hard-earned wisdom and disappointment. "Criticism?" he said evenly. "Is that what you call this? Real criticism comes from understanding and respect. This," he gestured around the studio, "this is just mean-spirited garbage, designed to make you feel better about your own inadequacies." The final words landed with devastating precision. Colbert's face went through a storm of emotions: shock, rage, then something almost like shame, before settling into a mask of cold fury. "Get out," he snapped. "Just get out of my studio." Ford gave a grim smile, devoid of warmth. "Gladly. But before I go, I want everyone watching to know something." He turned slightly toward the cameras, addressing the audience directly for the first time. This show isn't being canceled because of ratings or money. The words sent a chill through the studio. Everyone suddenly understood that something far bigger was about to be revealed. Ford's voice carried the weight of absolute authority as he continued, his gaze never leaving Colbert's increasingly panicked face. "This show is being canceled because of how you treat people. Because the network finally realized that cruelty isn't comedy, and that destroying people for entertainment isn't what television should be about." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Colbert's face went pale as he realized his guest had just exposed what was clearly meant to be confidential. "You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. The desperation in his denial only confirmed Ford's words. "Don't I?" Ford's smile was cold and knowing. "You think Hollywood is a big place, Stephen, but it's actually quite small. Word gets around when a host develops a reputation for ambushing guests, for making interviews so uncomfortable that publicists start warning their clients away. You think I'm the first person to walk onto this set and realize I've been set up?" The audience hung on every word, sensing they were witnessing not just the end of an interview, but possibly the end of an era. Camera operators kept filming despite frantic gestures from producers, instinctively knowing this was television gold that couldn't be interrupted. Colbert made a desperate attempt to regain control. "This is ridiculous. You're making things up because you can't handle a tough interview. The show isn't going anywhere." Ford laughed, genuinely amused for the first time all evening. "A tough interview? Is that what you're calling this hit job? I've done tough interviews, Stephen. I've sat down with journalists who asked challenging questions about my work, my choices, my craft. That's what professionals do." His voice hardened. "This isn't journalism. This is you working out your personal issues on live television." The host was now visibly sweating, his carefully constructed persona crumbling in real time. "You're delusional if you think—" "What I think," Ford cut in with devastating calm, "is that you've confused being mean with being funny for so long that you've forgotten the difference. You've built your entire late-night career on making people uncomfortable, and now you're shocked it's finally catching up with you." The truth in Ford's words was undeniable. Crew members exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, their faces betraying years of witnessing similar ambushes. This wasn't about one bad interview. It was about a pattern that had finally reached its breaking point. Colbert made one last desperate stand, his voice rising. "You can't just come on my show and destroy everything I've built. This is my studio, my audience." "Your what?" Ford's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Your victims? Because that's all we are to you, isn't it? Just people you can tear down to make yourself feel important." He gestured toward the stunned crowd. "Look around, Stephen. Look at their faces. These people didn't come here to watch you torture someone. They came to be entertained, maybe even to learn something. Instead, they got to watch you reveal exactly who you really are." The cameras panned briefly across the audience, faces of shock, disappointment, and uneasy recognition. No one was laughing. They were witnessing something raw and unsettling, and they knew it. Ford turned back to Colbert, his expression almost pitying. "You know what the really sad part is? You're actually talented. You could have built something meaningful here, created conversations that mattered. But you chose to be cruel because it was easier than being good." The words hit harder than any insult. Colbert's shoulders sagged as the fight drained from him, replaced by something that looked like shame. "You don't understand the pressure," he murmured. "I understand pressure," Ford replied quietly. "I've been dealing with it for 40 years. The difference is, I never used that pressure as an excuse to hurt people who couldn't fight back." He paused, letting it sink in. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You pick on people when they're trapped in this chair, when they can't defend themselves without looking like the bad guy." The insight was brutal in its precision. Colbert's entire interview style had been built on exploiting that imbalance. The host with the power, the guest forced to endure it. Ford began walking toward the edge of the set, each step deliberate and final. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize a bully when I see one. The only difference between you and the playground bullies I grew up with is that you've got better writers and a bigger audience." "Wait," Colbert called after him, desperation creeping into his voice. "You can't just leave like this. We can start over. Do this properly." Ford paused at the edge of the stage, not turning around. His voice carried clearly across the silent studio. "Start over with what? The respect you've already destroyed? The professional courtesy you've already abandoned?" Then he turned, fixing Colbert with one last unflinching look. "Some things can't be undone, Stephen. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Colbert sat frozen in his chair, unable to process that his guest was actually walking out on live television. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars exited the stage. "You know what I realized sitting here tonight?" Ford continued, his voice carrying through the stillness. "This show isn't really about entertainment, or information, or even comedy. It's about feeding your ego at other people's expense. And I'm done being food for that particular beast." With that devastating parting shot, he walked off stage with the quiet dignity that had defined his career. The cameras followed until he disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned people, and one broken host. Colbert sat motionless at his desk, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a shroud. The audience didn't clap, they didn't cheer. They simply sat, caught between disbelief and discomfort. This wasn't the kind of entertainment they'd come for. This was something far more real and far more painful. The silence stretched until Colbert finally found his voice, barely above a whisper. "We'll be right back after these messages." But everyone in the room knew there would be no coming back from this. The damage was done. The truth had been spoken. Harrison Ford had just delivered the most devastating critique of late-night television anyone had ever seen. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out in uneasy silence, it was clear they had witnessed something historic. The moment one of Hollywood's most respected actors finally said, "Enough was enough." Ford's words about the show's cancellation hung in the air like a prophecy. And judging by Colbert's haunted expression, it was a prophecy already coming true. The confrontation was over, but its impact would echo through the industry for years. Ford walked away with his dignity intact. Colbert was left to face the consequences of his cruelty. In the end, the veteran actor proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's ugliness. The Late Show had just experienced its most dramatic moment ever, and it might very well have been its last.